The HOA gave me 72 hours to destroy my grandfather's hand-built cabin, his final gift before dying. What they didn't know: I owned the land their entire community center sat on. One phone call later, I tripled their rent and turned their power play into their worst nightmare. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, and I knew before opening it that my peaceful life in Pine Ridge Estates was about to end. My hands shook as I read the bold letters across the top. Violation notice, immediate compliance required. Dear Mr. Thompson, it began in cold, legal language. Your unauthorized structure at 1247 Maple Lane violates HOA Covenant Section 12.3b. You have 72 hours to completely remove the wooden cabin from your property or face legal action and daily fines of $500. I stared at the letter, my coffee growing cold in my hand. The cabin they wanted destroyed wasn't just any structure. It was the last thing my grandfather had built with his own hands before passing away 3 years ago. Every board, every nail, every carefully carved detail represented months of work we'd done together during his final summer. But here's what the Hampton Oaks Homeowners Association didn't know about me: I wasn't just some regular homeowner they could push around. I was a commercial real estate developer who'd spent 20 years learning every trick in the book. And the biggest secret of all? I owned the land their precious community center sat on. Let me back up and explain how this war started. When I moved to Pine Ridge Estates 2 years ago, I thought I'd found paradise. The neighborhood was quiet, the houses were beautiful, and my corner lot backed up to a small wooded area that gave me perfect privacy. My grandfather, Pop, had been battling cancer, and I wanted him to have a peaceful place to spend his remaining time. Let's build something special back there, Pop had said, pointing to the wooded corner of my lot. A little cabin where we can sit and watch the birds. We spent that entire summer working together. Pop taught me techniques he'd learned as a young carpenter in the 1960s. We hand-selected each piece of cedar, carefully fitted every joint, and built something that wasn't just a structure. It was a masterpiece. The cabin was small, maybe 200 square feet, but it had beautiful carved details, a stone fireplace, and windows that perfectly framed the morning sunrise. Pop passed away that fall, and the cabin became my sanctuary. I'd go there every morning with my coffee and every evening to watch the sunset. It kept his memory alive. For 18 months, nobody said a word about the cabin. It was tucked back in the trees, barely visible from any angle. I'd even checked the original HOA covenants when I bought the house, and there was nothing that specifically prohibited what we'd built. Then Margaret Williamson became HOA president. Margaret was the kind of person who measured her neighbor's grass with a ruler and counted how many flowers were in someone's garden beds. Within a month of taking office, she'd issued 17 violation notices throughout the neighborhood for everything from unapproved mailbox colors to excessive garden gnomes. But she saved her biggest attack for me. The morning I received the violation notice, I was so angry I could barely think straight. 72 hours to tear down something that had taken 3 months to build? Something that contained my grandfather's final work? Something that wasn't even visible to most of the neighborhood? I called the HOA office immediately. Hampton Oaks Homeowners Association, this is Cheryl speaking. This is David Thompson at 1247 Maple Lane. I need to speak with someone about this violation notice I received. Oh yes, Mr. Thompson. Mrs. Williamson specifically instructed me to tell you that the deadline is firm. No exceptions, no appeals, no extensions. But this structure has been here for almost 2 years. Why is it suddenly a problem? Mrs. Williamson says that previous board oversight doesn't excuse current violations. You have until Friday at 5 p.m. I hung up, my mind racing. That's when I remembered something important. Something I'd almost forgotten about in all the chaos of moving and grief. 5 years ago, when I was still actively developing commercial properties, I'd purchased a small piece of land in this area as an investment. It was just under 2 acres, nothing special, but it had good visibility from the main road. I bought it thinking I might build a small office complex someday. After Pop died and I'd stepped back from active development, I'd completely forgotten about that little piece of property. My assistant had been handling the minimal paperwork, collecting the small amount of rent from the tenant, and I'd barely thought about it. But now, as I sat staring at Margaret's threatening letter, I realized something that made my heart race with possibility. I grabbed my old files and started digging through property records. There it was. 1249 Commerce Boulevard. A 1.7-acre lot that I'd purchased for $85,000 5 years ago. And according to my records, it was currently leased to the Hampton Oaks Community Association. I called my assistant Sarah immediately. Sarah, I need you to pull the file on the Commerce Boulevard property. The small lot we've been renting to some community group. Oh, the HOA property? Sure, hold on. I could hear her typing. Here it is. Hampton Oaks Community Association. They've been renting it for their community center for years now. They pay $800 a month. My pulse quickened. What are the terms of the lease? Month to month after the initial year. No long-term commitment. And David, they're actually 3 months behind on rent. I've been sending notices, but the contact person keeps saying they'll catch up soon. I almost laughed out loud. The same HOA that was giving me 72 hours to destroy my grandfather's cabin owed me $2,400 in back rent and was operating their community center on MY land. Sarah, I need you to do some research for me. Find out everything you can about HOA laws in our state. Specifically, what happens when an HOA doesn't have a legal meeting place. Are you planning something devious? Sarah asked, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Maybe. How quickly can you get me that information? Give me 2 hours. While Sarah researched, I drove over to 1249 Commerce Boulevard to see exactly what the Hampton Oaks Community Association had built on my land. What I found made my plan even sweeter. They hadn't just built a simple community center. Over the past 4 years, they'd invested serious money into the property. There was a beautiful 3,000 square foot building with a full kitchen, meeting rooms, and a large hall for events. They'd added landscaping, a playground, and even a small swimming pool. But here's the kicker. They'd done all of this improvement to MY land while paying below market rent and then falling behind on even those small payments. I took photos of everything, then drove home to wait for Sarah's research. When she called back, the news was even better than I'd hoped. David, this is fascinating. According to state law, an HOA must have a legally established meeting place to conduct official business. All votes, hearings, and board meetings must be held at their designated community facility. What happens if they lose access to that facility? They can't conduct any official HOA business until they establish a new legal meeting place. That means no new violations, no fines, no enforcement actions. Basically, the HOA becomes powerless. I smiled for the first time in days. And what's the current market rate for commercial property like mine in this area? I checked comparable properties. You could easily get $2,500 to $3,000 per month for a lot like that. Sarah, I need you to prepare 2 documents for me. First, a formal notice of lease termination due to non-payment. Second, a new lease agreement at market rate. How much market rate are we talking about? I thought about Margaret's smug voice and her 72-hour ultimatum. I thought about my grandfather's hands carefully carving those window frames. I thought about every morning I'd spent in that cabin, feeling close to Pop's memory. Let's go with $2,500 per month. And Sarah? I want both documents delivered tomorrow morning. First thing. That night, I sat in my grandfather's cabin and planned my next moves. The HOA thought they had all the power because they controlled the neighborhood rules. But they'd forgotten that power comes from leverage, and I was about to show them what real leverage looked like. Thursday morning, Sarah delivered the documents personally to the HOA office. I waited until noon, then called. Hampton Oaks HOA, this is Cheryl. Hi Cheryl, this is David Thompson. I assume you received some documents this morning? There was a long pause. Yes. Mrs. Williamson is reviewing them now. Great. I'll expect payment of the back rent by end of business today, plus the security deposit for the new lease terms. Mr. Thompson, there must be some mistake. We've been renting that property for years at $800 a month. You were renting it at $800 a month. But you're 3 months behind and the lease was month to month. I'm offering you a new lease at current market rates. But we can't afford $2,500 a month. That's not really my problem, Cheryl. Oh, and please let Mrs. Williamson know that if she'd like to discuss this, I'll be in my cabin this evening. The one she's demanding I tear down in. I checked my watch, about 30 hours. Margaret called me within minutes of my conversation with Cheryl. Mr. Thompson, this is completely unreasonable. You can't just triple our rent overnight. Actually, Margaret, I can. It's called market rate. But I'm a reasonable person. I'm willing to negotiate. What do you want? I want a written agreement that my cabin is grandfathered and exempt from all HOA regulations. I want an apology letter from the board acknowledging that the violation notice was issued in error. And I want my grandfather's memorial cabin treated with the respect it deserves. That's blackmail. No, Margaret, that's business. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. to decide. Same deadline you gave me. Friday afternoon, I was sitting in my cabin when I saw Margaret's car pull into my driveway. She walked to my front door first, but I'd left a note directing her to the cabin. When she finally made it back through the trees, I could see she'd been crying. "Mr. Thompson, please. This community center means everything to our neighborhood. We hold our children's birthday parties there. Our senior citizens have their weekly meetings there. It's the heart of our community." I gestured to the chair across from me. "Tell me, Margaret, what does this cabin mean?" She looked around at the careful craftsmanship, the hand-carved details, the stone fireplace where I still had a photo of Pop and me building it together. I didn't realize. My grandfather built this with his dying hands, Margaret. Every board in this place was measured and cut by a man who knew he was running out of time. This isn't just some random structure I threw up. This is his legacy. She was quiet for a long time. "The HOA board met this morning," she finally said. "We voted unanimously to withdraw the violation notice. Your cabin is officially grandfathered and exempt from all current and future HOA regulations." She handed me an envelope. "Here's the written agreement you requested and a formal apology from the board." "And my rent?" Margaret sighed. "We can't afford $2,500 a month. Our entire annual budget is barely $15,000. I've done my homework on HOA finances too. I know exactly what your budget is, Margaret. I also know that you spend $3,600 a year on landscape consulting from your brother-in-law's company to mow a half-acre of grass." She looked embarrassed. "Here's what I'm willing to do," I continued. "I'll keep your rent at $800 a month, but you need to pay your back rent immediately. And I want something else." "What?" "I want to be appointed to the HOA board. I want to make sure this kind of harassment never happens to anyone else in this neighborhood." Margaret actually smiled at that. "Mr. Thompson, after this week, I don't think anyone would dare oppose you for a board position." 6 months later, I was elected HOA president by the largest margin in neighborhood history. My first act was to revise the covenant enforcement procedures to include a mandatory review process and appeal rights for all violations. My second act was to organize a neighborhood potluck in my backyard, centered around my grandfather's cabin. I told everyone the story of how it was built, why it mattered, and how close it had come to being destroyed. The response surprised me. Dozens of neighbors shared their own stories about special places and meaningful structures in their homes. We realized that our community was stronger when we celebrated what made each property unique, rather than demanding conformity. Margaret, to her credit, became one of my strongest supporters. She later admitted that her aggressive enforcement had been driven by stress from her own family problems, and that targeting my cabin had been her way of feeling like she had control over something. The Hampton Oaks Community Association still rents their community center from me. They've never been late with rent again. In fact, they've been such good tenants that I've helped them apply for grants to make improvements to the facility. But the real victory wasn't financial or political. The real victory was sitting in my grandfather's cabin every morning, knowing that Pop's final gift to me was safe. The sunrise still comes through those windows exactly the way he designed it. The stone fireplace still warms the space on cold mornings. And sometimes, when I'm sitting there with my coffee, I can almost hear his voice reminding me that the most important things in life aren't the ones you can put a price on. The cabin stands as a reminder that sometimes the best way to handle a bully is to show them exactly how much power they don't actually have. Margaret learned that threatening someone's most precious memories is a dangerous game, especially when you don't know what cards they're holding. And me? I learned that my grandfather's final lesson wasn't just about carpentry. It was about standing up for what matters, using your head instead of just your heart, and never underestimating the power of doing your homework. The Hampton Oaks HOA is now one of the most reasonable and fair associations in the county. We focus on genuine community building rather than petty rule enforcement. And every time we have a board meeting in that community center, I'm reminded that respect is a two-way street. Some battles are worth fighting and some memories are worth protecting. Thanks to Pop's cabin, I learned how to do both.